Hello and welcome. Tonight we begin a slow and thoughtful exploration of one of the oldest and most powerful forces shaping our planet. When the Earth shifts beneath our feet, when storms gather on horizons, when seas rise and winds howl, we often call them disasters. They are moments of loss, upheaval, and fear. Yet if we look at them through a wider lens, stretching beyond human time into geological time, they are also messages, not written in words or symbols, but expressed in the rhythms of climate, the tremors of rock, and the surges of water. The question we gently ask tonight is this: what if Earth communicates through natural disasters? Before we journey further, I would love to extend a small invitation. If you find comfort in these quiet explorations, consider letting us know by liking this video. It helps others discover this peaceful space. You are also warmly invited to share in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. It has become a kind of map of our community, listeners scattered across the globe, yet gathered together in a single moment of stillness. And if you feel called to, subscribing ensures you will always find your way back here. For now, you are welcome to simply listen, breathe, and let your thoughts slow to the rhythm of the planet. To even begin to explore such a thought, we must first step back from the urgency of the human scale. A storm, for us, may last a night or a week. An earthquake may last seconds. A volcanic eruption may unfold across days or months. But for Earth, these are brief gestures in a conversation that has lasted billions of years. The rising of mountains, the breaking apart of continents, the cycling of ice ages and warm periods, these are the natural sentences and paragraphs of a planet in motion. Disasters, as we call them, are simply punctuation. They signal a shift, an emphasis, a pause. Volcanoes, for instance, erupt with a violence that seems incomprehensible. Yet each eruption releases gases, ash, and molten rock that reshape landscapes, alter climates, and renew soils. Ancient peoples often regarded volcanoes as sacred, not only for their destructive power, but for their capacity to create new land. In Hawaii, the eruption of Kilauea continually extends the island, adding black, steaming rock to the ocean. Life eventually colonizes this rock, beginning anew. From this perspective, volcanic eruptions are not simply disasters, but declarations. They remind us that beneath the surface, the planet is alive, restless, and creative. Earthquakes, too, may be read as signals. When tectonic plates grind past one another, the accumulated energy of slow geological movement is released in a sudden rupture. The shaking is violent, often deadly, yet it reveals the deep reality that the Earth is not static. It is a shifting mosaic of plates, carried along by convection in the mantle. Earthquakes speak of connection. What moves in one place affects another. A quake along the Pacific Rim may ripple through distant lands. The shifting of plates can raise mountains, lower valleys, and redirect rivers. It is a language of movement, of tension and release, a reminder that permanence is an illusion, and that all things rest upon a restless foundation. Storms are another form of communication. The swirling of winds, the gathering of clouds, the pouring of rain, all of these arise from the transfer of heat and energy across the globe. Hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons follow patterns influenced by ocean temperatures, atmospheric pressure, and the rotation of the planet. When they strike, they devastate, but they also redistribute heat, balance salinity, and deliver water to parched regions. To see a storm as communication is to recognize that Earth is continually adjusting, seeking equilibrium through motion and force. The violence of wind is not aimless. It is a response, a recalibration. Floods, too, are part of this dialogue. Rivers overflow, plains are inundated, and communities are disrupted. Yet floods also replenish soils, recharge aquifers, and support ecosystems that depend on periodic renewal. Ancient civilizations along the Nile needed the annual flood, for it brought the silt and water that made agriculture possible. In this sense, floods are reminders of reciprocity. What is taken is also given. What seems destructive in the short term is part of a cycle that sustains life over the long term. Fires may seem like the least communicative of all disasters, consuming everything in their path. Yet many ecosystems depend on fire. Certain seeds only germinate after exposure to heat. Nutrients locked in vegetation are returned to the soil through ash. Indigenous peoples long understood the role of controlled burns in maintaining balance. A wildfire can therefore be read as both destruction and renewal, a message that ecosystems require disturbance to remain healthy. When we consider all these forces together, a pattern emerges. Disasters are not random acts of violence, but expressions of the planet's ongoing balancing act. They are moments where deep processes become visible, where the otherwise slow and hidden rhythms of Earth reveal themselves suddenly. In this sense, disasters communicate the conditions of the planet. They tell us about the movement of plates, the circulation of oceans, the composition of the atmosphere, and the cycles of life and death that sustain ecosystems. Science has long treated disasters as phenomena to be measured, predicted, and mitigated. We study seismic waves, atmospheric models, hydrological cycles, and chemical signatures. These tools help us understand and prepare. But alongside this scientific approach, there is room for a more contemplative reading. What if we listened to disasters not only as threats but as messages? What if we regarded them as Earth speaking in its own language, a language of force and transformation? Such listening requires humility. It asks us to accept that we are not the central actors on this stage, but participants in a vast, ongoing story. Disasters remind us that human structures, no matter how advanced, are temporary. Cities may rise, but earthquakes can level them. Roads may stretch across continents, but floods can erase them. Power grids may light the night sky, but storms can plunge them into darkness. These moments are humbling. They reveal our dependence on the stability of the planet, and they remind us that stability is never permanent. In deep time, disasters have been turning points in evolution. The eruption of supervolcanoes has triggered mass extinctions, altering the course of life. Ice ages, driven by shifts in Earth's orbit and axial tilt, have shaped species through cycles of adaptation and migration. Asteroid impacts, though external to Earth, have acted as punctuation marks in this planetary story, resetting ecosystems and opening paths for new life. Each of these events communicates a truth. Life must adapt, or it will vanish. Species that endure are those that can read the signals and respond. Humans, too, have responded to disasters throughout history. Entire cultures have been shaped by them. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE reserved Pompeii in ash, giving us an unparalleled snapshot of Roman life. Earthquakes in the Mediterranean shaped the architecture of ancient cities, leading to innovations in construction. Floods along the Tigris and Euphrates gave rise to some of the earliest civilizations, embedding the rhythm of inundation into myths and calendars. These examples reveal that disasters not only destroy, but also teach. They shape memory, culture, and resilience. If we think of disasters as communication, then we might ask, what is Earth saying to us now? Wildfires grow more frequent and intense in many regions. Storms gain power as oceans warm. Floods and droughts alternate in unpredictable patterns. Glaciers retreat, seas rise, and tectonic activity continues unabated. Each of these signals points to a shifting balance, to the planet responding to the pressures placed upon it. Earth is not silent in the face of change. It speaks through these events, reminding us of the consequences of imbalance. Yet this is not a message of despair. For every disaster, there is also renewal. Forests regrow after fire. Floodplains flourish after inundation. Volcanic soils produce abundant harvests. Communities rebuild, often stronger and wiser. The Earth's communication is not a warning without hope, but a dialogue of adaptation. It reminds us that resilience is possible, that life persists, and that balance can be restored. To listen in this way is to participate in the ongoing story of the planet with patience and humility. It is to recognize that we are not separate from the Earth, but expressions of its processes, as much a part of its cycles as rivers, mountains, or storms. Disasters are not interruptions, but continuations, remind us that change is constant, and that survival depends on awareness, adaptation, and respect. Let us look deeper into how mountains are formed, and in that process, see more clearly why some have imagined them as beings of immense and hidden power. Mountains begin with collisions. When one plate of the Earth's crust presses against another, the edges cannot pass smoothly. Instead, the crust folds, fractures, and heaves upward. Over millions of years, what was once seabed or flatland becomes towering ranges. Rocks that form deep in the earth are thrust upward, exposed to sunlight and weather for the first time in hundreds of millions of years. This is a slow, grinding process. It is not the sudden birth of a creature, but the patient rise of something that feels alive by its very persistence. Imagine a being whose heartbeat takes eons. A mountain's growth is that heartbeat. With each tremor, each shift, its body reshapes. What we see as violent earthquakes are perhaps only the flexing of stone muscles. To us, destruction. To the mountain, movement. The Himalayas, Andes, Alps, Rockies. Each range is a record of these pressures. Their jagged ridges are not accidents. They are expressions of the hidden energy within the planet. The granite cores of ranges, like the Sierra Nevada, stand as evidence of deep magma chambers that cooled and solidified long ago. These crystalline bones now protrude into the sky. They gleam in sunlight as if polished by the ages. To stand among them is to feel the bones of a sleeping giant. And while these giants are built, they are also worn down. Wind carries fine particles from their slopes. Rivers carve canyons, tearing into their flanks and carrying fragments to distant seas. Glaciers scrape and gouge, leaving behind deep valleys and sharp ridges. This cycle of building and erosion continues without pause. Mountains are shaped not only by fire from below, but also by water and ice from above. They are being sculpted simultaneously from inside and outside, just as all living things are shaped by inner growth and external pressures. Consider the strange balance this creates. Mountains rise faster than erosion can cut them down, yet erosion is relentless, always smoothing, always reducing. What remains is never finished. The silhouette of every peak we admire is temporary, a fleeting stage in an endless process. When you look at a mountain, you are seeing it only in its current form, not in its eternal essence. In 1,000 years, the ridges will be altered. In 1,000,000, the shape will be unrecognizable. In 100 million, the range itself may be gone, replaced by plains or seas, while new mountains rise elsewhere. Is this not the rhythm of life? Birth, growth, decline, and transformation. The cycle of beings, the cycle of civilizations. Mountains mirror us, only stretched across incomprehensible spans of time. To call them giants is to recognize that their slowness is their life. They are not inanimate, they are living differently. Humans have always sensed this. Ancient myths rarely treated mountains as mere scenery. They were protectors, obstacles, deities. Mount Olympus in Greece, home of gods. Mount Fuji in Japan, sacred to Shinto tradition. Mount Sinai in the deserts, where divine revelation was said to occur. Mountains drew worship because they seemed closer to heaven, and because their presence felt more than physical. Their size suggested will, their immobility suggested endurance. People bowed to mountains as they bowed to rulers and spirits. It was respect for power, but also recognition of a kind of personality within the stone. Even in secular times, we feel it. Climbers describe mountains as if they have moods. Some days they are welcoming, clear skies, steady roots. Other days they are hostile, storms raging, avalanche thundering. Climbers prepare, but they also ask permission, as if the mountain chooses who may stand on its summit. The idea that mountains grant or deny entry is not rational, but it persists because the feeling is real. When you face a mountain, you feel judged by something beyond yourself. You feel measured. If we follow this line of thought, mountains can be seen as slow witnesses of history. Imagine a giant who has stood in silence for tens of millions of years. Imagine what it has seen: the rise of forests, the march of glaciers, the passing of countless species. Perhaps even the first humans, small figures crossing valleys, looking up in awe at peaks they could not hope to conquer. The mountain has seen it all, and it does not move. Its memory is written in strata, in fossils embedded in stone. Its gaze is unbroken, stretching across ages. And what of those fossils? Within mountain rocks, we find shells, corals, and marine creatures, evidence that what is now high above the sea was once ocean floor. These reminders are startling. A giant carries in its body the bones of creatures that lived in warm waters hundreds of millions of years ago. The summit of Everest itself is composed of marine limestone, filled with the remains of tiny sea life. What could make the metaphor of a giant more powerful than this? Mountains hold multitudes within them. They are not only beings of stone, but beings filled with the memories of other lives. Mountains also shape human destiny. They dictate routes of migration, trade, and conquest. Entire civilizations have been defined by their relationship with mountain ranges. The Inca built their empire in the Andes, mastering terraced farming along steep slopes. The people of Tibet shaped their culture in the thin air of the Himalayas. European histories filled with tales of armies struggling through the Alps. Mountains determine who meets and who remains apart. They form boundaries not only on maps but in minds. They also hold resources, metals, minerals, fresh water from glaciers. These gifts sustain life, but also create conflict. The mining of mountains has fueled civilizations and destroyed landscapes. To take from a mountain is to wound a giant. And yet, mountains are resilient, enduring long after human extraction has ended. They remind us that our interventions are temporary scratches upon their bodies, which heal in time spans far beyond ours. And what of their silence? Mountains rarely speak in ways we notice. A landslide, a rumble of rockfall, a sudden avalanche. These are their moments of voice, and they are powerful, but mostly they stand silent, immobile. It is in that silence that humans project meaning. We hear the silence as solemn, as sacred. We feel watched, though no eyes are there. We sense presence, though no body stirs. Mountains evoke this because their scale overwhelms us. They remind us of our limits. Perhaps the reason myths describe them as giants is because humans needed to translate that feeling into story. To say the mountain is a god or the mountain is a giant is a way of admitting that something more than rock is happening here. It is an acknowledgement of awe. Even if we now explain mountains with geology, the awe remains. The science does not erase the myth. Instead, the science deepens it. To know that Everest was once under a shallow sea makes the mountain more mysterious, not less. To know that continents move and ranges rise is to realize the earth itself is alive. So we return to the question, what if mountains were once giants? Perhaps they still are. Giants of time, giants of memory, giants of stone, beings that rise slowly and fall slowly, whose bodies shape weather, rivers, and lives. Beings that remind us that permanence is an illusion, and that everything is part of a cycle. Giants who do not need to walk, because their stillness is movement. Giants who do not need to speak, because their silence is voice. To walk among mountains is to walk among these beings, to feel small, yet included in their story, to listen for a heartbeat that takes millions of years to sound, and in that listening, to understand that the earth itself is alive, that we live not only on it, but within its breathing body. Mountains are not background, they are characters in the great unfolding of the planet, and whether or not we name them giants, they live as presences that shape us in ways we may never fully comprehend. Across history, entire civilizations have been shaped by their ability to listen and respond to Earth's dramatic moments of communication. When we look back, what we often call disaster may just as easily be seen as the stage on which societies rose, adapted, or fell. The Earth has always spoken in fire, water, and stone. How humans have chosen to hear those messages has determined survival. Take the civilizations of the Mediterranean. The eruption of Thera, now called Santorini, around 1600 BCE, was one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded history. Ash clouds spread across regions, Tsunamis swept coasts, and agriculture suffered in the aftermath. The Minoan civilization, once thriving, entered decline. Scholars debate the details, yet the pattern is unmistakable. A single eruption shifted the balance of power, altered trade, and changed the cultural landscape. Earth had spoken in fire and sea, and the human story was rewritten. Half a world away, the civilizations of Central and South America lived with similar communication. Along the Pacific coast, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions were common. Far from being seen only as terror, they were woven into cosmology. Mountains that smoked were considered alive. Tremors were regarded as signs of shifting worlds. When Spanish chroniclers arrived, they noted that many indigenous peoples saw disasters as messages, warnings, or transformations. They were read not as random misfortune, but as part of the great dialogue between Earth and its people. The Nile tells another story. Ancient Egypt thrived on the rhythm of annual floods. When the river rose, it deposited fertile silt across the floodplain. Crops flourished, communities prospered, and the civilization grew. When floods failed, famine spread. Pharaohs were judged on their ability to predict and manage the Nile's behavior. In this way, the river itself became a kind of language. Its swelling or shrinking told the people what to expect, what to fear, and what to celebrate. The Nile spoke, and Egypt listened. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, floods were less predictable, sometimes nourishing, sometimes destructive. They carved uncertainty into the lives of the people. Out of this uncertainty grew myths of deluge and renewal. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of a great flood that swept away worlds, a memory perhaps rooted in real events of rising waters. These stories preserve the lessons of disaster. They were records of communication, reminders of Earth's power, and the fragility of human plans. If disasters are Earth's way of speaking, then myths are humanity's way of translating. In every culture, there are stories of fire from the sky, waters rising, land shaking. These are not inventions from nowhere, but responses to lived experience. They are attempts to understand, to give shape and meaning to what otherwise feels chaotic. Through myth, the memory of disasters is carried forward, warning future generations to listen more closely. Science, too, is a form of translation. Where myth speaks in story, science speaks in data. Yet both attempt to interpret the same communication. A seismograph records vibrations. A myth recalls a shaking world. Both arise from the same source. Both are responses to Earth's restless expression. To recognize this is to see that science and story are not opposites but companions. Each a way of listening, each a way of remembering. What makes disasters feel so powerful is the way they compress geological time into human time. A mountain may take millions of years to rise, but an earthquake can change a city in seconds. A glacier may advance slowly across centuries, but a flood from its melting can reshape valleys overnight. These moments are the sudden translations of Earth's slow language into our fast one. They are points where the vastness of planetary time becomes visible, tangible, undeniable. And in those moments, humanity is reminded of proportion. We are small. Our buildings, our roads, our monuments, all are brief against the span of geologic time. Yet we are also resilient. Time and again, communities rebuild. Cities rise where earthquakes have struck. Villages return to floodplains. Forests are replanted after fire. In this resilience, we become participants in the dialogue. We answer Earth not with words, but with action, adaptation, and persistence. There is a pattern here. Where humans have listened, they have thrived. Where they have ignored or forgotten, they have suffered. Civilizations that learned to read the signals of rivers, mountains, and skies endured longer than those that dismissed them. Agricultural calendars were tuned to floods. Architecture was shaped by tremors. Rituals were timed to the seasons of wind and storm. These were not superstitions. They were ways of listening, ways of aligning human life with the rhythms of a dynamic planet. Yet even with our knowledge today, the challenge remains. Modern cities grow in places where Earth still speaks in floods, quakes, and storms. Technology gives us tools to prepare, Yet it can also create illusions of permanence. Levees hold rivers only for a time. Concrete resists shaking only up to a point. Satellites track storms, but cannot stop them. Each disaster reminds us of limits. Each one is a renewed invitation to listen more closely, to live more humbly. Some philosophers suggest that disasters awaken memory, not only in people, but in landscapes themselves. Ash layers preserve the story of eruptions. Sediment layers carry the memory of floods. Tree rings record years of fire and drought. Ice cores store traces of ancient atmospheres. The planet remembers its own communication, inscribing it in forms we can learn to read. Geologists and climatologists become translators of these inscriptions, uncovering the conversations of deep time. And as we uncover these records, a continuity appears. The disasters of the past shaped the world we live in now. Mass extinctions, triggered by impacts or eruptions, cleared paths for new species, including eventually our own. Shifts in climate pressured migrations that spread humanity across continents. Storms, quakes, and floods carved landscapes that became fertile grounds for agriculture. The disasters that once seemed endings were, in hindsight, beginnings. Each message from Earth carried both loss and possibility. Perhaps then, the real question is not whether Earth communicates through disasters, but whether we are listening deeply enough to understand. Are we hearing only the immediate destruction, or are we also hearing the longer message about balance, adaptation, and renewal? Disasters are not random cruelty. They are part of a pattern that sustains the dynamic equilibrium of the planet. To listen is to accept that change is constant, and that survival depends not on resisting it, but on learning to live within it. When viewed this way, every tremor, storm, and eruption is not just a threat, but a word, a phrase, in a language as old as the planet itself. It is a language we may never fully translate, but one we can learn to respect, to pause, to observe, to remember. That is the first step toward understanding. For in the end, Earth will continue to speak, whether we listen or not. The choice, as always, is how we respond. When we shift our focus from human history to the wider web of life, we begin to see that disasters are not interruptions to nature, but essential processes within it. A wildfire sweeping across a forest may look like destruction, yet in the ash-rich soil that follows, new seeds find the nutrients and sunlight they need to grow. Some plants have even evolved to depend on fire. Their seeds open only in extreme heat, waiting patiently through years or even decades until a blaze provides the perfect moment to begin life. The fire, then, is not an ending, but a signal, a kind of punctuation in the ongoing story of the forest. Volcanoes tell a similar story. When they erupt, they bury landscapes in lava and ash, silencing what once grew there. But given time, those same flows break down into some of the most fertile soils on Earth. Islands formed by volcanic eruptions become cradles for unique ecosystems. Life colonizes the barren rock, first through mosses and lichens, then through grasses, then trees. Birds arrive, insects follow, and eventually, thriving ecosystems emerge. Without the fire and ash, those islands would never exist at all. In this way, Earth communicates through cycles of destruction and renewal, shaping the diversity of life itself. Floods, too, can be read in this language. When rivers overflow, they may sweep away homes, fields, or roads, yet in their wake, they leave layers of nutrient-rich silt, recharging the fertility of floodplains. These floods are part of why ancient civilizations flourish near rivers. But beyond human use, floods restore wetlands, create new habitats, and support cycles of reproduction for fish and birds. They are rhythms of replenishment, as much a song of life as of upheaval. Hurricanes and typhoons, with their immense winds and rains, are another form of expression. They sculpt coastlines, rearrange barrier islands, and refresh estuaries with nutrients stirred from the ocean floor. Mangroves and coral reefs, adapted to withstand these forces, grow stronger in their aftermath. While communities often bear the brunt of such storms, nature itself has always lived with and even benefited from their cycles. What we perceive as catastrophe is part of the pulse of the planet. If we listen carefully, we can hear that each disaster is also an architect of balance. Predators and prey are shaped by floods and droughts. Migration routes adjust to the shifting of rivers or the cooling of ash-covered skies. Evolutionary pressures emerge from these disruptions, guiding the path of species through deep time. The asteroid that ended the reign of the dinosaurs was, from another perspective, the beginning of the age of mammals. The fire of one era becomes the light of another. For humans, this is perhaps the most difficult truth to embrace. We see disasters in terms of loss because we live on shorter scales of time. A fire that destroys a village, a storm that floods a city, an earthquake that topples buildings, these are tragedies in human lives. Yet if we zoom out, if we stretch our vision across centuries and millennia, the same events become patterns of renewal. Earth speaks in lifetimes longer than our own. What feels like devastation today may be the foundation of tomorrow's abundance. Modern ecology has begun to embrace this perspective more fully. Scientists recognize that disturbances are not anomalies, but essential drivers of biodiversity. A forest without fire becomes overgrown, vulnerable to disease, and ultimately less resilient. A river without floods loses its wetlands, diminishing habitats for countless species. A coastline without storms becomes stagnant, its cycles of renewal broken. In other words, to silence disasters would be to silence Earth's own voice, to stop the processes that make life flourish. This does not mean that suffering should be dismissed. Every disaster carries real human cost, and compassion for those affected must always be at the center of our response. But it does mean that by expanding our perspective, we can find meaning in what first appears only as chaos. We can see disasters as communication not only about fragility, but also about resilience, regeneration, and interconnection. Consider coral reefs, often called the rainforests of the sea. They are highly sensitive to temperature, and bleaching events caused by warming waters are devastating. Yet even here, recovery is possible. Some corals adapt to warmer waters. Some reefs regrow after storms or shifts. These cycles, painful though they may be, are part of a language that reminds us both of vulnerability and of possibility. They show that, while change is inevitable, resilience is also written into the fabric of life. Another example lies in forests shaped by storms. In the Amazon, for instance, fallen trees from windstorms create openings in the canopy. These gaps allow sunlight to reach the forest floor, triggering bursts of growth in plants that otherwise would never thrive. Animals that depend on those plants follow. Entire microhabitats form in the spaces created by what might appear, at first glance, to be destruction. The storm is not just force, it is also opportunity. Earth's communication, then, is not only through words of warning, but through whispers of renewal. It tells us that life and death are not opposites, but parts of the same cycle. It shows us that collapse can be the soil from which growth arises. It reminds us that to live on this planet is to participate in its rhythms, to accept change as the price of existence. We might even say that disasters reveal the poetry of Earth's language. A wildfire paints the horizon in crimson and black. A volcano builds mountains even as it destroys valleys. A flood carves new paths through land. These are violent images, yet they carry beauty as well. Beauty in the raw power of transformation. Beauty in the reminder that the world is alive, never static, always becoming. And within this poetry lies a challenge. Will we learn to live not against the rhythms of disaster, but with them? Will we design our cities, our systems, our societies, in ways that listen to the cycles of Earth rather than resist them? Indigenous communities often built homes and traditions aligned with natural patterns, moving when rivers shifted, honoring the seasons of fire and flood. Modern humanity, with its insistence on permanence, often forgets this. We anchor ourselves to coastlines, to fault zones, to floodplains, then are surprised when Earth continues its song. Perhaps disasters are reminders to be humble. They tell us that permanence is an illusion, that resilience lies not in control, but in adaptation. They invite us to find harmony rather than domination, to shape lives that flow with rivers instead of trying to force them, to build with the wisdom of listening instead of the arrogance of ignoring. When viewed this way, natural disasters are not Earth's punishments, but its teaching. They are lessons written in wind and stone, reminders etched in ash and water. They are invitations to join the larger rhythm, to see ourselves not as separate from nature, but as part of its continuous unfolding. In every tremor, every storm, every fire, the planet speaks. The question is whether we can learn not only to hear, but also to understand. For when we do, we discover that even in disaster, there is dialogue. Even in destruction, there is renewal. Even in endings, there are beginnings waiting quietly to rise. Across cultures and centuries, humanity has always searched for meaning in the power of disasters. To live beside a restless planet is to feel both awe and fear. Earthquakes, storms, floods, and eruptions have rarely been seen as meaningless events. Instead, they have been woven into stories, faiths, and traditions, each culture interpreting them as messages, warnings, or lessons from the earth or from forces beyond it. Ancient civilizations along the Mediterranean often explained earthquakes as the movements of gods. In Greece, Poseidon was not only the lord of the sea, but also the shaker of the earth, his trident striking the ground to unleash tremors. In Japan, myths told of a giant catfish deep beneath the islands, its movement sending ripples of destruction through towns and fields. These stories did not deny the reality of disaster, but rather gave it voice, turning chaos into communication. Through them, earthquakes became reminders of divine presence, signals that humans lived on borrowed stability. Volcanoes, too, were often interpreted as mouths of the earth. Polynesian cultures spoke of Pele, the goddess of fire, her anger flowing as molten rock, reshaping land and sea. In Italy, Vesuvius was feared and revered, its eruptions reminders that the mountain itself was alive, breathing beneath the calm slopes. To live near such forces was to accept that the earth spoke in fire as well as in rain. These interpretations, though framed in myth, carried a deep truth. They acknowledged that nature is not silent, that it has its own language, even if spoken in forms humans cannot fully translate. Floods, among the most common and devastating disasters, also became central in cultural memory. Nearly every civilization has a flood story, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the account in Genesis to oral traditions in the Americas and Asia. The flood is not only destruction, but cleansing, a reset of balance. It washes away corruption, preparing the world for renewal. Whether or not these stories were rooted in single historical events, their persistence reveals how people have long sensed in floods a voice beyond mere water. They recognize them as moments when the earth reminded humans of their fragility, their dependence, and their need for humility. As centuries passed, humans turned toward science to explain these forces. Yet even in science, the sense of communication persists. Earthquakes, we now understand, are not the tridents of gods, but the release of energy along fault lines, the shifting of plates upon molten layers. Volcanoes erupt because of pressure, temperature, and chemistry deep within the mantle. Floods occur from rains, melting snow, or storm surges, but to know the mechanism does not silence the message. Instead, it sharpens it. Earth is still speaking, only now the language is measured in seismographs, satellite images, and climate models. Science has become another way of listening, where myth framed disasters in terms of gods and spirits. Science frames them in terms of systems and feedback. Both approaches acknowledge the same truth. Disasters are not random acts. They are expressions of a living planet, signs that we are part of a dynamic whole. To study them is not only to protect ourselves, but to interpret the rhythms of Earth. And yet, myths and science need not stand opposed. In many cultures, the two flow together. In Hawaii, volcanic activity is both studied with precision and honored as Pele's presence. In India, rivers are measured by engineers, yet still revered as sacred beings. This blending reflects an understanding that disasters are more than physical events. They touch the emotional, the spiritual, the cultural. They remind us that knowledge is not only about prediction, but also about meaning. Modern psychology even suggests that humans are wired to seek meaning in disaster. When lives are overturned, when cities fall, when the ground itself shakes, people ask why. Some find comfort in science, in knowing the patterns and causes. Others turn to faith, finding guidance in the idea of messages or trials. Both responses reveal that disasters are never purely physical for us. They are also deeply human experiences, shaping identity, belief, and memory. The stories we tell about disasters endure because they help us live with uncertainty. They frame chaos in ways that give us strength. After the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, one of the deadliest in European history, philosophers wrestled with questions of suffering and divine will. Some saw it as punishment. Others saw it as proof of a world governed by natural law rather than intervention. That event shaped not only architecture and engineering, but also theology and philosophy. The earth had spoken, and humanity debated what the words meant. Even today, in an age of satellites and sensors, disasters continue to inspire cultural responses that reach beyond mechanics. Films, novels, and art imagine Earth as an agent, as if storms and quakes were deliberate acts. Activists speak of the Earth crying out under the weight of pollution and climate change. Poets describe floods as cleansing and wildfires as rebirth. These metaphors remind us that we still interpret disasters as communication, as language, even when we know the science behind them. And perhaps this dual vision is essential. If we see disasters only as mechanical events, we risk becoming numb to their deeper significance. If we see them only as myths, we risk ignoring the practical steps needed for resilience. But if we see them as both as events with physical causes and with symbolic meaning, we honor the full depth of Earth's communication. We become listeners not only with instruments, but with imagination. There is also a striking continuity between ancient interpretations and modern warnings. When a prophet spoke of floods as cleansing, was that so different from a climate scientist warning that rising seas will reshape coasts? Both are interpretations of water's power. Both are attempts to place human lives in the context of forces beyond control. When myths described mountains as living beings, was that not a poetic way of saying what geology confirms, that they rise, shift, and erode as if they are alive? Seen this way, disasters become a bridge between human knowledge and human wonder. They are reminders that the Earth does not simply provide a backdrop for life, but actively shapes it, actively speaks into it. Every tremor, every surge, every flame is part of a dialogue stretching back to the dawn of time. To listen is to recognize that our place here is not one of dominance, but of participation. And in listening, we also find guidance for the future. Indigenous traditions often carry teachings born from long familiarity with disaster. Coastal peoples who lived with hurricanes developed homes and customs suited for survival. Communities near rivers accepted the cycles of flood and retreat, planting accordingly. These practices reveal a wisdom that modern societies sometimes neglect in their pursuit of permanence. By relearning how to listen, how to align with rhythms rather than oppose them, we may rediscover resilience. In the end, disasters are never only about loss. They are about memory, identity, renewal, and communication. They ask us to pay attention. They ask us to adapt. They remind us that we live not upon a static planet, but within a breathing, shifting, speaking one. And so, whether we call it myth, science, or something in between, the truth remains the same. Earth is not silent. Its voice rises in storms, rumbles in quakes, whispers in floods, and blazes in fire. The challenge is not whether it speaks, but whether we are willing to listen. Throughout history, entire civilizations have risen or fallen in rhythm with the Earth's disasters. To say that natural forces shape culture is no metaphor. It is a truth inscribed in ruins, in abandoned cities, and in the migrations of people across continents. When we trace these patterns, it becomes clear that earthquakes, floods, droughts, and storms are not only events of destruction, they are turning points in human history, moments where Earth's communication redirected the path of societies. Consider the story of the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete, flourishing more than 3,000 years ago. The Minoans built palaces, developed writing systems, and traded widely across the Mediterranean. Yet their world was closely tied to a nearby volcano on the island of Thera, present-day Santorini. Around 1600 BCE, that volcano erupted with unimaginable force. Ash darkened skies, tsunamis rolled across seas, crops failed. The eruption may not have ended the Minoan civilization immediately, but it weakened it. Over time, the disruption left it vulnerable to decline and conquest. Here, disaster spoke not with words but with fire, water, and silence, reshaping history. Centuries later, in the Andes, societies lived under the gaze of volcanoes as well. The Inca and their predecessors built elaborate agricultural systems in high valleys, always aware of the mountains that towered above them. Eruptions sometimes devastated villages, but they also enriched the soil. Volcanic ash brought minerals that allowed crops to flourish. Disasters, in this case, communicated both danger and opportunity. They reminded people that destruction and fertility often flow from the same source. Floods have left equally lasting marks. The Nile's annual flooding was not a disaster, but a rhythm, one that allowed Egypt to thrive for millennia. Each year, the waters rose, depositing rich silt upon the fields. Farmers depended on the river's communication, measuring its rise with instruments called nilometers, building calendars around its cycles. But when the floods failed, famine spread, weakening dynasties and opening the way for political change. Thus, even stability was fragile, always tied to the balance of water. Contrast this with the story of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers could flood unpredictably. Their sudden surges destroyed crops and settlements. In response, people built levees, canals, and irrigation systems, early engineering feats born of necessity. Here, disaster was not a steady rhythm, but a chaotic voice, one that forced innovation. The harshness of the rivers may have shaped the region's worldview, inspiring myths of floods and divine wrath. Earth spoke loudly, and civilizations learned to build not only walls, but entire systems to contain its power. In more recent times, disasters have continued to guide history. The Lisbon earthquake of 1755 shook not only Portugal, but all of Europe. It destroyed much of the city, killing tens of thousands. Yet its impact reached beyond physical damage. Philosophers and theologians debated its meaning. Was it punishment? Was it chance? Or was it natural law? The disaster accelerated shifts in thought, pushing Europe toward Enlightenment ideals of reason and science. Earth had spoken, and human thought changed in response. In Asia, the monsoon has always been a powerful communicator. For centuries, it dictated harvests, trade, and migrations. Too little rain brought drought and famine. Too much rain brought floods. Farmers, merchants, and rulers alike were bound to the rhythm of winds and waters. Even today, millions depend on the arrival of monsoon rains. The pattern is both gift and risk, a reminder that civilizations rest upon seasonal balances that are never guaranteed. Sometimes disasters close chapters of history. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 was one of the largest in recorded history. It launched so much ash into the atmosphere that global temperatures dropped. Crops failed in Europe and North America. Famine spread. The following year became known as the year without a summer. Yet, even in this crisis, Earth's communication shaped culture. Writers like Mary Shelley and Lord Byron, trapped indoors by the strange, cold weather, wrote works that would become classics. Darkness inspired creativity, showing that disasters can shift not only politics and economies, but also art and imagination. Earthquakes have also redirected human paths. In China, quakes have toppled dynasties, and shifted population centers. In the Americas, quakes along the Pacific Rim have reshaped coastlines and altered the fate of cities. Each tremor is both a moment of loss and a reminder of connection. For the same forces that destroy also build, raising mountains, forming valleys, and creating the landscapes where future generations will live. When we see disasters through this lens, they appear less as interruptions and more as chapters in a continuing dialogue. Each event reshapes the land and the people who inhabit it. Cities are abandoned, rebuilt, or moved. Borders shift. New ideas emerge. In every case, the Earth's communication has left its mark, whether in ruins, in myths, or in laws designed to protect against future calamities. But there is another side to this dialogue: resilience. Disasters test societies, yet they also reveal strength. The people of Japan, living with frequent earthquakes and tsunamis, have developed architecture, emergency systems, and cultural practices that emphasize preparation. Communities in the Caribbean, living with hurricanes, build traditions of mutual support and recovery. These responses show that communication is not one-sided. Humans answer back. They adapt, learn, and shape their lives in response to Earth's voice. The question arises, does Earth communicate only through destruction, or is there also a form of care within these events? Consider the long view. Without volcanic eruptions, fertile soils would not exist. Without floods, many valleys would lack the nutrients to sustain crops. Even earthquakes, destructive in the moment, are part of the tectonic processes that renew landscapes. The very continents we inhabit are the product of such forces. Perhaps the communication is not only warning, but also offering, not only reminding of fragility, but also granting gifts of renewal. This perspective changes how we interpret disasters today. In a warming world, storms grow stronger, seas rise, and fires spread more widely. To see these not simply as random events, but as communication is to acknowledge that Earth is telling us something about imbalance. Just as past civilizations listened and adapted, so too must we. The message is clear. Our actions have consequences, and the planet responds. The question is whether we will hear it in time. Even now, scientists study patterns of disaster not only to predict them, but to understand them as part of a system. Seismologists read the tremors of the Earth, much like ancient priests once read omens. Meteorologists track storms, seeing in their paths the influence of oceans, winds, and heat. Climate scientists measure shifts in glaciers and seas, listening to the whispers of change in ice and coral. These are all forms of listening. They are modern translations of an ancient language, one that has always been spoken through disaster. In this light, disasters are less about punishment or chance and more about feedback. They are ways in which the Earth balances itself, correcting, shifting, reminding. To live here is to be part of this feedback, to be both shaped by it and responsible for how we respond. The stories of the past show us that those who listen carefully survive and adapt. Those who ignore the messages risk decline. The continuity across time is striking. Ancient farmers watching the floods of the Nile, builders reinforcing cities against earthquakes, philosophers reflecting on calamities, scientists studying data from satellites, all are engaged in the same act. They are listening. They are trying to interpret what Earth is saying, and in doing so, they keep alive the oldest conversation, the one between humanity and the planet we call home. If disasters have shaped civilizations in their physical and social forms, they have also carved deeply into the spiritual imagination of humanity. For as long as people have asked questions about existence, disasters have provided some of the most challenging puzzles. They strike suddenly, often without warning, and in their wake humans search not only for survival, but for meaning. What does it mean when the earth opens, when the sky darkens, when water rises without end? These questions echo across religions, philosophies, and myths, suggesting that disasters have been some of the most powerful teachers humanity has ever known. In many traditions, disasters were seen as a direct line of communication from divine forces. The Old Testament tells of floods, plagues, and storms as messages of judgment or tests of faith. The flood in Genesis cleansed the world, sparing only those chosen to continue humanity. The plagues of Egypt were signs of power meant to free the oppressed. Storms in the New Testament are calmed as demonstrations of authority over creation. Whether historical or symbolic, these stories suggest that disasters were understood as more than random events. They were dialogues, calls to reflect, repent, or renew. Other cultures framed disasters less as punishment and more as balance. In Hindu traditions, natural destruction is often linked to cycles of creation and dissolution. Shiva dances not only to destroy, but to prepare for renewal. Floods, fires, and quakes are seen as necessary turns in the great wheel of time, reminders that permanence is illusion. In Buddhism, impermanence itself is central, and disasters become stark manifestations of the truth that nothing endures unchanged. The earth, in its communication, becomes a mirror of spiritual teaching. Indigenous traditions often express a different kind of interpretation, one rooted in relationship rather than hierarchy. Among many Native American nations, natural events are understood as part of a living world in which humans are one thread among many. A storm is not punishment but presence. An earthquake is not wrath but reminder. The earth speaks, and humans are expected to listen with respect, not fear. In this view, disasters are not alien forces imposed from above, but expressions of kinship, voices of a larger family of beings. Philosophers, too, have wrestled with these questions. After the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, thinkers such as Voltaire and Rousseau debated its meaning. Was it a sign of divine displeasure, or proof of an indifferent universe? Voltaire's Candide mocked the idea that all disasters serve a higher good, highlighting the suffering of innocence. Rousseau suggested instead that much of the suffering came not from the quake itself, but from human choices building dense cities, ignoring natural risks. Even in philosophy, disasters were read as communication, whether from God, from nature, or from the consequences of human action. The scientific age shifted focus, but did not end this search for meaning. Earthquakes became measured in magnitudes, storms tracked by satellites, and floods predicted by hydrology models. Yet behind the precision, the same questions persisted. Why here? Why now? Why these people? Why such loss? Science provided mechanisms, but the human spirit continued to ask about purpose. The persistence of these questions shows that disasters communicate on more than one level. They speak both in physical terms, fault lines, pressures, winds, and in existential terms, mortality, humility, connection. In times of disaster, people often report feelings of awe. Psychologists define awe as the sense of encountering something vast that transcends ordinary understanding. Standing before a surging river or watching the glow of lava, people feel both fear and reverence. Awe is not only terror, but also wonder. It is a recognition that the earth is vast, alive, and beyond complete control. In this way, disasters open spiritual doors, leading people to experiences of humility, unity, and sometimes transformation. In Japan, the concept of mono no aware captures this awareness. It means the gentle sadness and beauty of impermanence. After earthquakes or tsunamis, this sensibility reminds communities that change, even painful change, is part of the fabric of life. In the West, the Romantic poets of the 19th century drew similar inspiration from natural power. Wordsworth, Shelley, and Byron wrote of storms, mountains, and tempests as forces that shape the soul, forces both terrible and sublime. Their writings show that disasters, even when destructive, can awaken deeper reflections about the place of humanity in the cosmos. Some spiritual traditions go further, suggesting that disasters call humans not only to reflect but to act. They are messages urging greater alignment with the earth. In contemporary ecological spirituality, hurricanes and wildfires are interpreted as reminders of imbalance, signs that human activity has strained natural systems. While science explains how warming oceans fuel stronger storms, spirituality asks what humans should learn from this truth. The Earth's communication, in this frame, is not punishment, but feedback, a call to live differently, more gently, more attentively. It is worth noting that disasters can also unite communities in ways few other events can. When the earth shakes or the waters rise, divisions of politics, wealth, or culture often dissolve in the immediacy of survival and recovery. People help neighbors, strangers, even rivals. In these moments, the Earth's communication takes on a social dimension. It reveals human interdependence, the reality that no one survives alone. Spiritual leaders often highlight this as a hidden gift within disaster, the reminder of solidarity, compassion, and shared vulnerability. This sense of unity may itself be part of the message. If Earth communicates through disasters, perhaps one of its clearest words is connection. No matter how powerful our cities, our technologies, or our walls, we remain bound together by the same ground, the same air, the same waters. When the Earth moves, it moves for all. In this way, disasters strip away illusions of separation. They remind us that to live here is to share fate. There is also a paradox in how disasters inspire both fear and reverence. On one hand, they destroy lives and livelihoods. On the other, they create landscapes of profound beauty. Volcanoes devastate, yet they also form islands rich with life. Earthquakes tear apart, yet they also raise mountains that capture the imagination. Floods sweep away, yet they leave behind fertile plains that feed civilizations. This duality suggests that the Earth's communication is layered, not simple. Its words are not yes or no, gift or curse. They are more like poetry, filled with contradiction and depth. Perhaps that is why disasters inspire not only myths and science but also art. Painters have captured eruptions and tempests as sublime visions. Musicians have composed symphonies echoing thunder and waves. Writers have turned disasters into metaphors for inner turmoil, for transformation, for renewal. Through art, humanity answers back, not with calculation, but with creativity. Earth speaks in fire and flood, and humans reply in color, sound, and story. The conversation becomes two-sided, richer with each exchange. Even silence can be part of this dialogue. After a disaster, when ruins stand and lives are altered, there is often a hush. Survivors walk through empty streets, listening to the absence of familiar sounds. In that silence, reflection deepens. What mattered before seems less urgent. What was taken for granted becomes precious. This silence is its own form of communication, a pause that invites gratitude, humility, and perhaps wisdom. When viewed across centuries, it becomes clear that disasters are not interruptions to human spirituality and philosophy. They are central to it. They have shaped myths, guided prayers, inspired art, and provoked deep thought about life, death, and meaning. To ignore this dimension is to miss half of what disasters communicate. They do not only speak through trembling ground or surging seas, they speak through the responses they evoke within us, the ways they draw forth humility, compassion, creativity, and reflection. And so, as humanity continues into an uncertain future, the dialogue remains. The Earth communicates, sometimes gently, sometimes fiercely. People interpret, respond, and carry forward new understandings. In the end, the question may not be whether disasters are messages, but whether we allow ourselves to hear them as such. For to listen is to grow, and to grow is perhaps the deepest purpose of the conversation itself. If natural disasters speak to us in moments of terror and awe, they also continue to communicate long after the immediate danger has passed. Their messages are etched not only in memory, but in the very landscapes they leave behind. Floodplains, ash fields, scarred coasts, and tilted stones are all records of Earth's voice. Generations later, these marks become reminders, warnings, and sometimes sources of renewal. In this way, disasters extend their dialogue across time, teaching not just those who endure them, but those who inherit their aftermath. Consider the ruins of Pompeii, preserved beneath volcanic ash since 79 CE. For centuries, the city lay hidden, forgotten by all but local legend. When excavations began, the remains told a story far richer than any text. Streets, mosaics, and even food preserved in bowls revealed not only the vibrancy of Roman life, but the suddenness of its end. The ash was not just destruction, it was preservation, a message carried across millennia about fragility and resilience. In Pompeii, the earth spoke once through eruption, but it continues to speak through ruins, reminding us that life can end in an instant, yet traces endure. The same is true for landscapes shaped by great floods. In North America, the channeled scablands of Washington state tell of massive ice age floods that reshaped entire valleys. For centuries, geologists puzzled over the strange, scarred terrain. Only in the 20th century did J. Harlem Brett propose the radical idea that colossal floods had carved it. His theory was resisted at first, but eventually confirmed. Here the earth had left behind a message written in stone, one that could only be deciphered with patience and imagination. The scars of disaster became a lesson in humility, reminding us that forces far larger than human comprehension have shaped the world we now inhabit. Cultural memory functions in a similar way. Oral traditions across the world preserve stories of disasters that occurred long before written records. Aboriginal Australians tell of rising seas that drowned coastal lands thousands of years ago, stories that align with geological evidence of post-ice age flooding. Indigenous peoples in the Pacific Northwest recall tales of great quakes and tsunamis, memories supported by geological records of the Cascadia subduction zone. These stories are not mere myths, but living archives, ways in which communities carry the Earth's messages forward. By listening to them, later generations remain alert to risks, prepared for futures that might otherwise catch them unawares. Architecture can be read as a form of communication with the Earth. In Japan, traditional wooden structures were designed to flex with earthquakes, rather than resist them rigidly. In flood-prone regions, homes were raised on stilts. Ancient temples built on high ground may reflect both reverence and practical awareness of rising waters. Each adaptation speaks of lessons learned, of communities responding to the Earth's language of disaster with design and foresight. These choices are responses, answers inscribed in timber, stone, and soil. There are also the monuments to resilience. In Lisbon, after the catastrophic earthquake of 1755, the city was rebuilt with some of the world's first anti-seismic architecture. Wide boulevards replaced tangled medieval streets, and new buildings incorporated wooden frameworks to absorb shocks. The disaster became not only a tragedy, but a catalyst for innovation. The Earth's destructive message was met with human creativity, turning sorrow into progress. In this way, disasters communicate not only endings, but beginnings. They demand response, and in response, civilizations evolve. The messages are not always heeded, however. Sometimes, memory fades, warnings are forgotten, and the Earth must repeat itself. Volcanic eruptions occur again in places where communities return to fertile soils. Coastal cities grow despite past tsunamis. Rivers are dammed and redirected even after floods remind us of their force. When the same regions are struck once more, the question arises, did we truly listen? Communication requires not only expression, but reception. And the history of disasters shows that humans sometimes fail to attend to what the Earth has said. Yet even in failure, there is learning. After each event, archives expand, maps grow richer, instruments improve, awareness deepens. The Earth speaks through tremors, waters, and winds, and humanity gradually deciphers its language. Seismographs, satellite imagery, and climate models are all translations, tools that allow us to hear more clearly. Scientists, like interpreters, listen for patterns, for signals that warn of what may come. Technology becomes part of the dialogue, extending human ears and eyes into realms once hidden. But beyond science, there is still the human heart. Survivors tell their stories, passing down experiences that statistics cannot capture. A grandmother describing the roar of a tsunami. A father recounting the way the ground rolled beneath his feet. A child sketching the image of fire on a horizon. These are forms of communication that keep disasters alive in cultural consciousness. They are the voices that ensure the Earth's messages do not vanish into silence. It is striking how often disasters lead communities to ritual and commemoration. Memorials are built where earthquakes leveled cities. Annual ceremonies honor those lost to floods or storms. In Japan, stone markers along coasts warn future generations not to build below certain lines, reminders carved in enduring material. These rituals and monuments transform disaster into shared memory, making the Earth's voice part of collective identity. Through them, communication stretches into the future, offering guidance long after the original event has passed. The Earth's communication through disasters is not only about destruction, but about cycles. Volcanic eruptions enrich soils, floods renew plains, and even forest fires clear ground for new growth. These cycles are part of the conversation. They remind us that creation and destruction are intertwined, that what appears as devastation in one moment may be foundation for abundance in another. This dual message is difficult, even painful, but it is also profoundly honest. The Earth does not comfort with half-truths. It speaks in full realities, harsh and generous alike. Looking at history, we might see disasters as punctuation marks in the long sentence of civilization. They are commas that pause growth, colons that introduce change, periods that end chapters. Each one alters the story, shifting its direction, redefining its themes. To read history without them is to miss the rhythm of the narrative. To read them as communication is to see that the Earth itself is part of the authoring process, co-writing the human story. What then does it mean to live in such a dialogue? Perhaps it means cultivating not only resilience, but attentiveness, listening for the lessons carried in stone, water, and ash, honoring the memories passed down in story and ritual, recognizing that when the Earth speaks, it does not speak only to those in the moment, but to all who come after. It is a conversation across centuries, one that asks each generation to receive, interpret, and respond. This perspective also reframes our place in time. Too often, humanity sees itself as separate, living in a modern age disconnected from the ancient past. Yet disasters remind us that we share experience with those who lived thousands of years ago. The quake that shakes a 21st century city is not so different from the one that toppled temples in antiquity. The flood that surges over levees echoes those that swept away early settlements. To feel the Earth's force is to join a lineage, to step into a continuity of communication that transcends eras. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the importance of this communication grows. Climate change intensifies storms, raises seas, and increases fire risks. These are disasters unfolding not only as isolated events, but as global patterns. They are messages not just to regions, but to humanity as a whole. If the Earth has always communicated through disasters, today its voice may be clearer than ever. The question is not whether the Earth is speaking, but whether we are willing to hear and act. And so, when we look at ruins, landscapes, oral traditions, and memorials, we are not merely studying the past, we are listening to echoes of the Earth's words, carried across centuries, waiting for us to attend. Disasters are not final. They are part of an ongoing dialogue, one that challenges, humbles, and sometimes inspires. To ignore them is to silence the very voice of the ground beneath our feet. To listen is to enter a relationship as old as humanity itself, one that binds us not only to our ancestors, but to the Earth itself, speaking still. If the Earth's disasters are messages, then their communication does not end with the present generation. They extend forward, into futures we may never see, shaping how unknown descendants will understand both themselves and the planet. Just as ancient floods, eruptions, and quakes left their testimony in rocks and stories, today's disasters are inscribing their own records for others to inherit. To imagine disasters as a form of communication is also to recognize that the Earth is speaking not only to us, but through us, to those who will come long after. Consider the vast data archives we create: satellite images, seismic records, atmospheric measurements, and even personal videos uploaded to the internet. All of these are layers of memory, signals preserved in forms more fragile than stone, more abundant than any ancient archive. If future generations discover these traces, what story will they read? They may see how the earth spoke through wildfires that darkened skies, through hurricanes that tore across oceans, through droughts that withered harvests. But they will also see how humanity responded, whether we adapted, ignored, or transformed. Our reactions are part of the communication, intertwined with the disasters themselves. In this sense, every natural disaster becomes a conversation, just between Earth and humanity, but between generations. The quake that levels a city in one century may shape building codes that protect lives in the next. The storm that devastates one coastline may inspire flood defenses that shelter another. Memory becomes infrastructure, carried forward as design, law, and culture. Each adaptation is a reply, one that future people will inherit, perhaps without even knowing the voices that first provoked it. There is also the possibility that some messages are encoded in ways we cannot yet decipher. For instance, ice cores hold records of past climates, including evidence of volcanic eruptions, dust storms, and atmospheric shifts. These frozen archives speak across hundreds of thousands of years, carrying messages about cycles of disaster and renewal. What seems silent to us today may be legible to others tomorrow, as tools and knowledge evolve. In this way, Earth communicates with the future by embedding signals in matter itself, waiting for interpreters. One might also wonder whether disasters are Earth's way of ensuring humility across generations. Each time humans grow to certain of control, the planet interrupts with reminders of vulnerability. Towers fall, levees break, fires consume, uncertainty dissolves. These interruptions reset expectations, shaping cultural memory. Even if individuals forget, the patterns return often enough that societies cannot ignore them entirely. In this way, the Earth does not allow amnesia to last forever. Its voice is persistent, ensuring the dialogue never ceases. But disasters are not simply chastisements, they also carry encouragement. Floodplains may be destroyed in one season, but become fertile grounds in another. Lava flows obliterate villages, but eventually create rich soils. Fires clear undergrowth, enabling forests to thrive anew. These dual messages, warning and renewal, are legacies passed forward. They remind future generations not only of fragility, but of resilience, of the capacity to rebuild and flourish. In this sense, disasters speak not only of endings, but of continuations, of the possibility that life always finds a way through rupture. Our myths, too, are carriers of these messages. Flood stories, tales of fiery skies, legends of trembling earth. These narratives, repeated across centuries, are forms of communication bridging past, present, and future. Whether literal memory or symbolic truth, they preserve the sense that humans are never alone in shaping their destiny. The earth itself participates, sometimes gently, sometimes with overwhelming force. When these stories are told to children, the Earth's messages are kept alive, woven into identity. Looking at the modern world, it is striking how disasters create moments of global communication. When an earthquake strikes across the ocean, satellites relay the event in seconds, and people everywhere witness it. Relief efforts mobilize, scientists share data, communities express solidarity. The disaster becomes not only a local event, but part of a global conversation. In this sense, Earth's voice is amplified by human networks, reverberating more widely than ever before. Whether that amplification leads to deeper listening or only fleeting attention is another question, but the potential is clear. Future generations may also see disasters as thresholds, moments when the trajectory of civilization shifted. They may mark our time by the great hurricanes, the megafires, the once-in-a-century floods that became once-in-a-decade events. These markers will not only describe environmental change, but social response. Did we recognize the signals? Did we act upon them? In this way, disasters are like questions posed by Earth to humanity, and history records our answers. It is possible that future societies will interpret disasters not only scientifically but philosophically, as expressions of the planet's balance, as reminders of relationship rather than domination. Just as ancient cultures saw floods and quakes as divine communication, tomorrow's cultures may see them as ecological dialogue, the Earth reminding its inhabitants of limits and connections. Whether one interprets this metaphorically or literally, the effect is similar. Disasters shape consciousness, reminding people that they are part of something larger than themselves. And perhaps this is the most profound aspect of disaster as communication. It binds us into continuity. A quake that shook an ancient city is not entirely separate from the one that rattles a modern metropolis. Both are part of the same planetary voice, speaking across centuries. When we stand amid ruins or read geological records, we are not merely observing the past. We are overhearing conversations that began long before us and will continue long after. Each disaster is a syllable in an ongoing dialogue, one that transcends human lifespans, carrying the voice of the Earth forward into futures we cannot imagine. If the Earth communicates through disasters, then the question becomes, how do we answer? Do we ignore, forget, and repeat the same mistakes? Or do we listen, adapt, and pass the lessons along? Our response is itself a message, one that future generations will read as clearly as the scars of a landslide or the ash of an eruption. In this way, communication is not one-sided. The Earth speaks, but so do we, and together we are co-authors of the ongoing story inscribed in land, memory, and time. To see disasters as communication is to widen our sense of what it means to live on Earth. They are not only interruptions of daily life, they are reminders that life itself is embedded in larger cycles, larger systems, larger forces. Storms, quakes, fires, and floods do not merely happen to us. They happen with us, reshaping our communities, our stories, and our understanding of what it means to belong here. The continuity between past and present disasters shows how deeply interwoven humans and the planet are. Every culture that has ever stood close to fault lines, rivers, or volcanoes has learned that stability is temporary. Yet each culture has also found ways to live, to rebuild, to continue. In that persistence lies an answer. Communication is not only about what the Earth says, but about how humans reply. We reply by shaping homes to withstand storms. We reply by planting again after floods. We reply by recording, remembering, and passing knowledge along, so the next generation can be safer, wiser, more resilient. Disasters therefore belong to both Earth and humanity. They are not events we simply endure. They are collaborations in the long history of adaptation. Earth provides the challenge. Humanity responds. Together these exchanges create a rhythm across centuries. Sometimes that rhythm is tragic, sometimes creative, but always transformative. It carries forward the truth that nothing is fixed. Every mountain will eventually erode. Every coast will shift. Every society will adapt or vanish. In the long view, disasters are not ends, but continuations, each wave folding into the next. This perspective changes how we see resilience. It is not only about survival in the face of catastrophe, it is about listening and answering wisely. A floodplain is not simply dangerous, it is also fertile. A volcano is not only destructive, it creates soil rich with minerals. A fire does not only destroy, it clears the ground for renewal. To live in communication with Earth is to recognize both sides of disaster, the pain and the promise. It is to build not against the planet, but alongside it, learning to hear both warning and invitation in its voice. In this way, natural disasters are part of a much larger dialogue. They are not only local events but global patterns. A drought in one region affects food prices across oceans. A volcanic eruption alters skies worldwide. An earthquake can ripple through economic and cultural systems far beyond its epicenter. The Earth speaks to each community directly, yet it also speaks through connections, weaving humanity into a shared experience of vulnerability and interdependence. The message is clear. No one stands apart. Every response is part of a collective story. And what does this story tell us? That Earth's voice is constant, steady, enduring. It spoke to the first humans who gathered near rivers and mountains. It spoke to empires that rose and fell. It speaks to us now through headlines and seismographs. And it will speak long after our names are forgotten, long after cities fade back into soil. To realize this is not to despair. It is to find peace in continuity. We are listeners for a brief time, participants in a conversation older than language itself. The comfort in this perspective lies in gratitude. To live on a restless planet is to be given both challenge and beauty. Storms may rage, but they also bring rain to fields. Earthquakes may topple walls, but they also remind us of the living planet beneath our feet. Fires may burn, but they also renew forests that will shelter generations to come. Each disaster is a message, but also a gift, shaping the world in ways that sustain life as much as they threaten it. So perhaps the invitation is simple: to slow down, to listen, to pay attention not only to the noise of daily life, but to the deeper rhythms beneath it, to notice the quiet messages in weather, in landforms, in the cycles of renewal that follow loss. If disasters are Earth's most dramatic form of communication, then everyday patterns are its gentler voice. The rustle of leaves in a storm, the smell of wet soil after rain, the warmth of sunlight after cold, all of these are also messages. They are whispers alongside the roars. To hear them is to deepen connection, to live more fully within the dialogue of this planet. And now, as we bring this long reflection to a close, let us hold on to the sense that the Earth is not silent. It has always spoken, and always will. The question is whether we choose to listen with care, humility, and imagination. If you've found peace or curiosity in these quiet explorations, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from tonight. We may be separated by miles and hours, yet here we are, sharing this same moment of reflection. If you feel called, you can leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply let us know what time it is where you are. And if you'd like to journey with us again, you are warmly invited to subscribe, so these meditative explorations can continue to reach you. For now, may the ground beneath you be steady, the air around you calm, and your heart at rest. Thank you for being here. Good night.